Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I am Zeckthar.
And I'm Yuksen.
We are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We have seen the rise and fall of many empires, yet this month we will be speaking of those crazy human space Vikings, known as the Spacewolves.
Outstanding, Zeckthar. They're one of my favorite units of Space Marines, those strange humans known as the Sons of Rus.
Right you are, Yuksen. Well, let's get into it. Well, Yuksen, we are wrapping up our month talking about the Spacewolves.
Are you sure we can't talk about them for one more week?
Now, Yuksen, that wouldn't be fair. I know you love the Spacewolves as much as I, but we have other things to talk about. In fact, next week, we're going to take a break from Warhammer 40k and discuss the Dragon system with the fine folks of Terran 42.
Cool, but, wouldn't that be against Umkulu's decree for us?
Nonsense, brother. He instructed us to record this realm's history. He said nothing about journeying to another realm for a spell.
Oh, goody. We are taking a vacation.
Quite right, brother. Before we go, we need to finish our thoughts on the Spacewolves. But first, we have some questions from our listeners.
So, we have Elby. She asked a couple of questions. One is, how do you activate the Catalepsian node? Does it just keep them awake when it's needed, or do you have to do something different to activate it? Well, from the information that we have, the node actually activates by itself when a person reaches a certain level of stress due to lack of sleep or fatigue. And Elby's second question is whether the Imperium node is located above the stomach so that it can analyze and neutralize toxins before it reaches the stomach, where typically substances would be digested. The answer to that is yes, like I myself described in the Vox. Becoming a space wolf, the Priamnar is located above the original stomach so that it can analyze and neutralize toxins before it reaches the stomach.
And our last question is from Sakrona, who asked, how long has Bjorn been in the fight, including his time outside of his dreadnought armor? Now, Sakrona, I'm assuming you're asking, how old is Bjorn? That's actually a really tough question. As far as we can tell, Bjorn the Fell-Handed is at the very least 10,000 years old. He's actually significantly older than that. With the first recordings of the Space Wolf just before the Battle of Prospero in 734.M31, which was some 11,000 years ago. We don't really know when he first came into being. We don't have that early, we don't know what his trials of Mordecai were or anything like that. All we do know is when he first starts into the history books, it takes place, a little bit before the Battle of Prospero, right, Yuksen?
I believe it's first around the time where he ended up being forced upon the position of bodyguarding Caspar Hauser.
Right, which you actually discussed anyways in Notable Space Wolf characters when you went over Bjorn, correct?
And so at that point, he was at least a Grey Hunter.
Okay, so he's probably at that point, 70, 80 years old?
Maybe.
Okay, so probably somewhere between 80 and 40, right?
Yeah, somewhere between 40 and 80.
Yeah, because he's not a blood claw at that point. So,
no.
Yeah, if you really want to boil it down, he's probably 11,362 years old. There.
Just throwing out a number.
Okay. Yeah. We just know that he is at the very least, anyways, 11,000 years old.
Plus.
Yeah. But we thank you for the questions. For the rest of you, anyways, when we get back from our vacations, feel free to ask any questions you want on our next subjects or any of the subjects that we've already had. So be it Necrons or Space Wolves. Now we do have to start this, and I figured the best way we started it is where we ended last time, where we were talking about some of the notable Space Wolves that we didn't get to talk about in our original Vox about notable Space Wolves. We just simply didn't have time for this guy last week.
And who would that be?
We got to talk about Bulveye the Berserker.
Yes. He must be talked about.
Yes. Bulveye is kind of an interesting character. He is quintessentially a Berserker. From Terran 42, if you know anything about the Berserkers of Germania or the Celts, These people were normally, when they got into the battle, like half mad. Mortal wounds didn't really stop them. Not only that, but they had they tended to actually heal quite quickly because
Or
of the
ignore
adrenaline.
wounds.
Yeah, they would just simply ignore it. There are records, in fact, anyways, of berserkers getting an arm like completely lopped off and them simply picking it up and beating the person to death who lopped their arm off with it. Now you take that kind of like psychoticness and then you stuff it into a space wolf, you're going to end up with the one mean puppy. Not only that, but he also has, as we've talked about, the Canis Helix. So when he goes into these berserker rages, his fingers will elongate into deadly claws, and he just simply tears his enemies to shreds. He never actually passed the blood claws because it took place anyways on one of the great battles that they were in. He got separated with his company of blood claws, and when they found him, he was surrounded by demonettes. Just everything was just destroyed around him, including his pack. Hundreds of demonettes, and he was the only one left alive. To this day, no one knows if Bulveye just went into a blind rage and killed everybody, or if they were already dead, and that's what caused the Berserker to kind of take over. But after that, anyways, he took a blood oath and became a lone wolf. Now, Yuksen, I believe you were going to go into what lone wolves are, but before you do, Bulveye probably will never actually succeed from being out of lone wolf. And Yuksen, you'll get into that. But one of the reasons why is because I think even in his own mind, he doesn't know if he actually killed his own brothers or not. And that's something he will never be able to atone. To this day, I mean, he is a beast. He is what? How did you describe the wolf in last week? They're monsters, simply monsters.
Yeah,
that's Bulveye when he gets into a rage. He's been known to literally take on an entire Carnifex by itself. I mean, he literally ripped his way through it with his bare hands. To this day, Bulveye's detractors still call him Kinslayer because of what happened behind his back. However, not even the most hot-headed Bloodclaw would dare to call him that to his name. Although there is 100 barrels of mead that has been gambled that maybe Lucas, the Jackal Wolf, might be the first. And if he does, it will probably be the last thing he ever does. I don't even think Lucas is that mischievous. I think he's just smarter than that. But you got any questions about Bulveye, or would you like to go ahead and or say anything about Bulveye, or would you like to just go ahead and go into Lone Wolves?
I'll just go into lone wolves.
Okay.
So, as we mentioned, space wolves are in packs, and what ends up happening sometimes is the entire pack will be wiped out except for one person. And that person will have suffered so much that despite the hypnotherapy, which I mentioned before, helps them deal with loss and whatever, they will get into such a state that they will not be able to join like any other units until they fulfill an oath to themselves or to other people, like basically saying, I will kill the mightiest thing. Or as we mentioned in the case of Bjorn, who might not be the first one, but is certainly one of the first recorded and probably the first that's ever been recorded as surviving his oath. In his case, his oath was killing what was he, an arc demon?
I believe so. Didn't he tear out his throat with his lightning claws?
Yeah.
And wasn't he also sorry to interrupt, but wasn't he also exonerated by Lehman Russ himself?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Against the Demon King Arvax, the Arc Slaughterer. Which actually sounds so much better.
Fair enough.
But in most cases, they take these oaths and it's almost like suicidal, basically.
Right. The concept is that either they do something so heroic that they're exonerated, or they die gloriously in combat.
Yeah. And in some cases, they'd prefer to die over actually succeeding.
Right. By the way, how does the rest of the Spacewolves treat these guys?
Well, pretty much, since people pretty much leave them alone, they see them, they respect them, but it's not like they're, I want to be like that person. No. They understand these people have suffered a major loss and that this is really the only choice that they felt that they have, basically, at this point. It has been noted that in many cases, a wolf lord will allow a lone wolf to go into the army and basically choose whatever it is that he wants to arm himself on his mission. Things like they're one of the few that, other than the Wolf Guard, will be able to wear Terminator armor.
Wow.
They are also, in some cases, able to use frost blades.
What are those? Are they some sort of like a power weapon?
Kind of, not quite. The best way to put is they are crafted. One of the ways that they craft it is they make chainsaw-like blades out of ice kraken teeth, or there's energized crystals that they find. Energized diamond that they find to create these weapons out of. And these things look like a glass sheet of ice, hence the name Frostblade. And they are even more powerful than a power weapon.
Really?
Yes.
That's actually kind of impressive. Is there anything more powerful than a Frostblade then? Like that's bladed?
That's bladed? I have no idea. Probably some sort of psychic weapon, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Probably something a Grey Knight would wield.
Yeah. Or a legendary weapon,
Yeah, I hear you.
So many lone wolves throughout the galaxy have gone missing due to the fact that they keep to themselves and are constantly on the hunt.
Sounds like a chapter I know that we do need to discuss. Or should I say, company. So we kind of hinted about this last week, and that's the third, as Yuksen used so eloquently put it anyways, there are 12 companies or great companies of the Spacewolves, and I kept hinting at this other one. Well, there is actually another one. It's called the 13th Company, also known as the Zeckthar in the local dialect of Fenris, and was one of the original and most renowned great companies of the Spacewolves, Space Marine Legion. It's not really a chapter of the Spacewolves or a company of the Spacewolves today, but they're still around.
So there really are 12 companies, right?
Yeah, well, no. Let me explain. This goes way back to when Leman Russ first became a Primarch, right? So we've talked about this, I think, about 3 or 4 times at this point, right? The Emperor beats Leman Russ, and then he's like, all right, see you guys later. I'm going off to space. And everybody that followed him was like, no, we want to follow you. And so they did. And those that survived the process of becoming a Space Marine became this Zeckthar, this 13th great company. It was Leman Russ's favorite. And then they, during the Horus Heresy, they kind of disappeared into the warp. Everybody just kind of thought that they were probably dead, and then they kind of popped back up in the 13th during the 13th Black Crusade. They've shown up a couple of times since then. These guys are so this entire time, literally, they've been in the warp and doing nothing but killing Chaos Space Marines, demons, worshippers of chaos. I mean, that's all they've been doing for the last 10,000 years. These guys are like the best of the best of the best. Right now, anyways, it is believed that their chapter master is Jarn Bloodhowl. Although that is kind of disputed because it seems like they've kind of broken off.
Wolf Lord, right?
What did I say?
Chapter master.
Oh, yes, the Wolf Lord. Same bloody thing. Forgot they're Space Wolves. Has to have wolf, fang, or claw in it.
Plus, the chapter master, aka the Great Wolf, is Grimnar.
But he's not the chapter master. He's the Great Wolf. Anyways, the Wolf Lord is known as Jorn Bloodhowl. Although that is kind of disputed because it seems like they've kind of split up a little bit. and it's kind of hard, kind of keep uniformed and the warp. So there might actually be a few Wolf Lords actually out there leading big sections of it. We won't know until they actually all pop out of the Great Warp. And who knows when that's going to happen. So one of the more notable characters that met up with the 13th Company was actually Ragnar Blackmane. I mentioned this during our Vox on the notable characters of the Spacewolves. He met up with the long-lost 13th Company of Spacewolves who had been lost in the Eye of Terror. They helped him anyways in his pursuit of Maddox the Sorcerer from the 10,000 Suns, and they end up eventually helping him defeat Maddox. They just kind of keep disappearing, though. I don't think that at this point they have returned to the Fang.
Weren't some of them shot by the Inquisition? The ships?
I don't know. They might have. That sounds like something the Inquisition would do. Or are you talking about the attempt, anyways, of the second founding?
Oh yeah, never mind.
The Wolf and Battle Brothers, yeah, those guys. Although one other thing, anyways, about the 13th Company is they have, because they've been in the warp as long as they have, and they are 10,000 years old. Remember how we were saying, by the way, that Space Marines can die of old age? One of the reasons why these guys have lasted as long is one of the main reasons why is because they've been in the warp. And time travels differently in the warp. But they're still all very old. And they have a lot of Wolfen that have accompanied them because a lot of them have just slowly been taken over by the Canis Helix because they've been around that long. But yeah, that's who we've been hinting at is the 13th chapter. They're very interesting. They're very secretive. They're very secretive. and in fact, actually, the Spacewolves don't talk to anybody else about them. They are kind of the Spacewolves' secret. But I do have a question for you, Yuksen, unless you want any more information about the 13th.
No.
Okay. Could you give us a brief description, anyways, on how humanity views the Sons of Rust or the Spacewolves and their chapter?
Company. Chapter. Right. Chapter. So, let's break it down to first the citizens of the Imperium. They view them as, because they actually treat humans as people and people to protect, the citizens actually like and welcome them, not just because they are defenders. They're also seen as being somewhat caring and actually, likable.
Which I will say is interesting because they're known as the executioners of the Emperor.
True.
Normally people don't really like their local executioner. I mean, he might be a nice guy. It's just that, one day he might have to take your head off. But I agree with you. I think compared to the rest of the Space Marine chapters, they're probably looked on more, they look on humanity more benevolently and more as protectors of humanity than probably any of the other Space Marines other than
the Salamanders.
The Salamanders. I mean, that is the whole thing the Salamanders do.
The red-eyed black guys.
Are you sure you meant the Salamanders? I thought for sure you were going to say the Black Templar.
You mean the people who feel that whoever doesn't think that the Emperor controls the entire universe or it's his place, they're considered enemies and should just be stomped on?
Well, as you know, anyways, we've always made this joke anyways. A salamander will help somebody anyways across the street. A Black Templar will just simply step on them because they're in the way. And then get disgusted anyways because they soiled their boots. Anyways. Right. But okay, so that is kind of, the grunts and just the serfs of humanity. What about the Inquisition?
Okay, so starting with
excuse me half a second, Yuksen. And we've kind of talked about the Inquisition a little bit. I have, especially on my last Vox that I did, the last Siege of the Fang. But the Inquisition, it always seems to kind of had this problem with the Spacewolves, especially the Wolfen, in my opinion. Now, I know there's like three different sections of the Inquisition. What were they again, Yuksen?
Okay, so there's the Oros Xenos, who don't really have that much of a beef with them because their whole viewpoint is based around aliens, Xenos, aliens.
And the Space Wolves is another group of big guys, anyways, that can help him kill aliens.
Yeah. And if they had a problem with them, then they'd have a problem with the main Space Marine chapter that they use, which is the Death Watch.
Right.
Then there is the Oros Malleus, and they focus on everything demon related. Hence why they were brought in when it came to the First War of Armageddon.
Right. And also, they pretty much predominantly use the Grey Knights, correct?
Yeah. Whose sole purpose is basically kill demons.
Right.
That's their job.
And the third one I really hate. Who's the third one again?
Third one. The Hereticus, aka Witch Hunters, aka you sneezed the wrong way. You're evil.
AKA just north of the loony bin. God,
innocence proves nothing.
And what's their Space Marine unit that they use?
They don't have a particular Space Marine unit. What they have is actually, and it's directly connected to them in comparison to the Grey Knights and the Death Watch, of whom the Inquisition reaches out to get their help. The Sisters of Battle, aka nuns with guns, are like directly connected to them. They don't reach out. They are part of
the Inquisition,
the Ordos Hereticus.
Right.
So and they hate the Space Wolves.
So this is the part of the Inquisition that I was earlier referring to. This is the part that really hates the Space Wolves, right?
Yes.
So what keeps these two units anyways from actually just going at each other?
Well, I think part of it has to deal with the fact that they're Space Marines, which, as we know, are superhumans. But on the other hand, also part of it's to deal with the fact that by eliminating them, they do sacrifice a large amount of manpower to defend humanity. But also, it's mainly because, it's just a bad idea trying to attack the Space Wolves.
Yeah.
Pretty much what it boils down to.
And if you listen to my last little mini box, they have actually tussled once. And it was after the First War of Armageddon. We actually briefly discussed it when we talked about Logan Grimnar.
Yeah. And where Bjorn popped up and went, hey, you guys should just stop.
Yeah.
We're going to sit down.
That was, and honestly, I think Bjorn would have had him keep going, except for Logan had already killed the lead Inquisitor. So he's like, okay, that should have just solved it. And the Wolves wanted to keep fighting. I already saw that the Inquisition at that point, anyways, they just kind of, they had kind of lost the will to fight. So he's just like, no, we're done.
Well, at that point, it was down to the person that they were fighting was no longer the Inquisition, but the Grey Knights, which would have been a bad decision to continue fighting against.
Yeah, I will say the other thing though that we did not mention, I did mention in my small vox is that one of the things that Bjorn did do and settle into the peace treaty is that none of the Space Wolves got mind wiped, which is normally what happens when anybody comes in contact with the Grey Knights.
Yeah,
to keep them secret.
Yeah, he was able to. He did it in such a way that instead of having all the humans wiped out, he said, okay, just wipe their memories basically instead.
Right.
And everybody who knows about the Grey Knights of the Space Wolves, just leave them be. Basically. Right.
Well, I mean, and when the war, the First War of Armageddon started, the only person that actually knew about the Grey Knights was the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar.
It was there.
What's that?
It was there at least.
Oh yeah. Okay. Well, the only one of the Space Wolves to know who the Grey Knights were, anyways, before Logan Grimnar called in a favor and asked them to show up.
Right.
was Logan Grimnar. And speaking of the Grey Knights, what are your thoughts, anyways, on how the rest of the Space Marines think of the Space Wolves? I mean, okay, now we're obviously we're not talking about the Traitor Legions.
Well, in that case, we already know the viewpoint of the Thousand Suns, don't we?
It's the same as every other Traitor Legion. We hate them.
Except for theirs is, we hate them much more.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay, they might have to get in line with, who is it? The Iron Warriors. There's another unit.
No, Alpha Legion, probably.
Is it Alpha Legion that really hates the Space Wolves?
They hate them because they were constantly being basically picked on because Space Wolves are just like, you guys don't fight.
Right.
You hide in the corner and stab people in the back.
Yeah. There's no honor in that. You pansies.
Yeah.
But okay, but I'm talking about the and we'll just keep it anyways to the first foundings, because I know there's like 50 million of the second foundings, and we're not going to discuss all of them. It's not going to be like, so Yuksen, what do you think the Minotaurs think of the Space Wolves? Nobody cares.
I think the majority of the chapters are, it's not like they're, hey, what's up? It's more like just, they are a brother chapter. I mean,
kind of keep them at arm's length.
Well, except for, of course, we know about the Dark Angels and the rivalry between them and the Space Wolves, and how they don't necessarily have the best rapport between them.
But they get along famously with the Black Templars, right?
The Black Templars have quite literally almost attacked, actually, Space Wolves on Armageddon, in fact.
What?
There's actually a story where a group of Space Wolves and a group of Black Templars were fighting some orcs.
Mm-hmm.
And after they finally wiped out the orcs, one of the Space Wolves grabbed a weird boy, aka the Orc Psyker's weapon, and they're going to take it. And that caused a fight between them and the Black Templar, because the Black Templar, as we know, are like anything. We don't even have librarians, and yet we'll travel in the warp for some reason.
Everything to a Black Templar is heresy,
and yet we'll do it.
Okay, what about okay, so they probably get along with the Salamanders pretty well, don't you think?
I would assume so.
Yeah. Then I have no idea about the Blood Angels or the what is it? The Iron Fists? Rogel Dorn's boys.
Yeah, I think it's the Iron Fists.
Yeah. I think I don't know anything about either of those two chapters, that, well, at least their relations with the Space Wolves. I would kind of assume that maybe the Blood Angels get along with them, but the Iron Fists don't. Mainly because the Blood Angels are very, they're kind of barbaric in their own way.
Kind of like the White Scars might actually fit well with the Space Wolves.
Right. Yeah. I think that's probably a pretty accurate statement. But we're forgetting one. Probably the most famous, the Smurfs. What do you think of the what do you think the Ultramarines think of the Space Wolves? This is actually kind of documented, but what do you think they think?
Judging by the fact that they disregarded the viewpoints of their Primarch, probably not well.
Yeah, on a grand scheme, I think it's more of the problem that a lot of people have with the Ultramarines, and I can kind of see this, is that they kind of tend to look down on all the other Space Marine chapters. And the Space Wolves are
the Primarch still.
Right. And well, even before they had the Primarch came back. even still, anyways, because there's just so many more of them. And they're the ones, and their Primarch's the one that came up with the Codex Astartes, and their Primarch's the one, anyways, that started the second founding, and also the Primarch Space Marines. So they're just like, yeah, we are, the big baddies. And the Space Wolf chapter, I think, is one of the few, anyways, that just doesn't take that guff. It's just not in their nature. Although I will say that they do work well together. There have been documentations, like, for instance, if you've read any of the Ultramarine Omnibus. Have you read any of that, Yuksen?
No.
Okay. And I believe
it's based around Smurfs.
Yeah. Yes, it's based around Smurfs. One in particular. And this, I think it's the second book. They go up against a hive fleet of Tyranids, and this Ultramarine gets separated from most of the rest of his group, and he ends up with this ragtag group of like 6 or 7 different Space Marines from different chapters, and one of them happens to be a Space Wolf, and they fight well together. The Ultramarine kind of is he has a respect for the Space Wolf and his tenacity and his combat skills, but he kind of looks upon him in distaste for his barbarism. And I think that's a pretty good description, anyways, of how the Ultramarines look at the Space Wolves. But speaking of which, and we've been kind of talking about how other Space Marine chapters think of him. What do you think the Primarchs think of him? The two that have come back. Now, remember, Robert Gilliman's been around for a while, and he's been around for what, 200-300 years, something like that.
I don't know,
something. And then Lyon L. Johnson just returned. Which, by the way, one of the reasons why some people think Lehman Russ disappeared. Some people think he went into the warp to go try to find Lyon L. Johnson. You know how pissed he's going to be when he comes back anyways and finds out that he's just been chilling at home. I think there might be some words there spoken between Lehman and L. Johnson.
Is he chilling at home, or is he basically in a back to tank? Sorry, a
back to tank.
Star Wars back to tank. You know.
Yeah, he was in stasis mode.
Yeah.
Slowly getting healed. And ironically, I think the only person that knew that he was there was the Dark Angels, or some of the Dark Angels, and then the Emperor himself. I think, well, the Emperor himself apparently knows everything, but whatever. And maybe even Robert might have known. I don't know. I read it a while back. It's been a while. But what do you think their positions are on the Space Wolves? Now let's start with Robert Gilliman. Now, okay, so we do not have.
Maybe I should be asking you, what do you think their viewpoints are?
Well, obviously we got to start with Robert Gilliman because he's been around longer, and this second time, the second go around, he's been around longer.
As a disclaimer, we're calling him Robert. This is not a mispronunciation. We're just calling him Robert.
Okay, well, what were we supposed to be calling him?
It was like Robot or something like that.
I've never heard anybody call him that. I've always heard him call him Robert. So Bobby Gilliman has been around the longest. And we could talk about Robbie Boy for a while, and I could give you his backstory, but honestly, we just don't have the time. So I'm going to do a separate Vox, kind of like that I did with the Fang in this next week. So stay tuned, and I'll pull it out at some point. It might be a little bit longer because he has a very storied history. And when we do, we will eventually anyways talk about the Ultramarines. And when we do, we will probably have a whole segment based on just Robert Gilliman. He is actually a very important part of the Imperium of Man. But since he's come back, he's obviously, as you talked about, Yuksen, he brought with him the technology for the, what is it, Primarch Space Marine? That's the new one, right? No, not Primarch.
Primaris.
No. Primaris. Yeah, Primaris. Thank you. The Primarch Space Marine. You know, he's making more Primarchs. No. Primaris Space Marine. It's got 3 extra gene seeds stuffed into him. Hopefully not in the chest cavity.
It's like, well, too bad.
I hope it's like on a leg or something like that. It's like, yeah, we don't have any more room in there, man. And at this point, anyways, he has had some contact with the Space Wolves. The Space Wolves very begrudgingly allowed them anyways to start turning some of their guys into Primaris Space Marines. But Logan Grimnar kind of he doesn't look at Robert Gilliman. First off, he looks at Robert Gilliman more as an equal than a Primarch, which is kind of interesting. I mean, if this was Rogel Dorn, or probably if it was Rogel Dorn anyways, he probably murdered Logan Grimnar by now for heresy, but he still follows orders anyways from Robert Gilliman to a degree. He's just very hesitant to follow him. I think a lot of that is a lack of trust. And I think Robert is showing a lot of patience with Logan, which I find interesting. I think it's because he knows that he's going to need the Emperor's executioners here soon. But I think it's a hesitant alliance, kind of like it's just been anyways for the last 10,000 years. There's just kind of this hesitancy anyways for, like we mentioned before anyways, just kind of how they operate and how they look at each other. They're just kind of, they run things differently. It's kind of like in Terran 42, it would be like if you had an alliance between Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar. Okay? So it would be kind of like pairing this awesome barbarian general with this awesome, like civilized general, so to speak. I think they would they respect each other. It's just more of a distrust of their tactics. Now, do you got anything else to add about Robert Gilliman, Yuksen?
No, not really, but I do have a viewpoint concerning Lionel Johnson, other than the fact that, let's face it, his thoughts can't be exactly expressed at this point in time since, he has been in stasis.
Right.
So he probably doesn't have necessarily the total focus on how things have progressed with the Spacewolves.
Right.
But before then, it seems like he had at least... He saw them as barbaric, but also as honorable fighters that'd be worth fighting next to.
First off, I think him and Lehman Russ, we mentioned it just a few minutes ago, how it's thought of even Lehman went to go find his brother in the warp.
Well, that's up to debate, but
you just don't do that anyways for somebody anyways that you hate. So I'm assuming
that he hated him. I'm just saying that it's not necessarily like they were buddies either.
No, I think there was a friendly rivalry between the two. I think that's actually kind of where we differ. I think anyways, you think it was honestly just like a real honest to goodness rivalry. They didn't really not like each other, but they didn't really like each other either. And to me anyways, I've just always kind of found them anyways more as kind of like a friendly rivalry. Am I missing something here, or is that what you think?
I think we will agree to disagree.
Okay, fair enough. And I think that goes on to his sons as well. I think that they'll still keep on with the whole, whenever they come into contact, they'll have that scuffle anyways for tradition standards. But I think that they'll just kind of continue with the status quo. To me, I find more interesting anyways is what do you think Lionel Johnson's going to do with Robert Gilliman?
I would have no idea.
Well, one of the interesting things is that after the Horus Heresy, Lionel Johnson really thought that he was going to become the War Master. After Horus anyways fell to chaos. And even before Horus was named the War Master, he always thought he was going to be the War Master. So now he's woken up, and the guy who's in charge is Robert, little Bobby. It's gotta grind his gears a little bit, don't you think?
It depends. In comparison to into the thinkings of Lehman Russ, Lionel Johnson was more tactical in thinking. So he may end up going, well, it makes more sense for him to be there right now. Maybe in the future, he would take on the role of War Master, but right now, just having this guy here until he can get his bearings, get everything set up. Because, the Dark Angels don't even have their own planet anymore.
They don't have their fortress anymore?
They are basically on a floating fortress.
Oh, okay. Right. I was like, the fortress is gone? What happened to it? Bob didn't take it. Okay, so we are kind of running out of time with this last part, but real quick, obviously anyways, there is one more thing we really do have to talk about. which is the Spacewolves Navy. Before we get into that, anyways, do you have any other thoughts or final thoughts, anyways, on the Spacewolves before we get into the Navy? Because then after the Navy, we do have to go. So, is there any other thoughts you got on the Spacewolves? Any other anecdotes or interesting factoids?
Anything that I'd probably add to it would take way too long.
You got nothing?
Nothing short.
Okay. Well, I got one thing before we start talking about the Navy, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So remember last week you talked about Murder Fang?
Yeah.
The Wolf and Dreadnought. I did a little bit of research on him myself, Yuksen. It turns out nobody knows who he is. He just kind of they were fighting Alpha Legion, Logan Grimnar and the first company were fighting the Alpha Legion on this one planet, and they kept thinking they were going to get ambushed because that's what the Alpha Legion does. And they come around the corner and they just see this giant dreadnought just like murdering Alpha Legionnaires all over the place. And so obviously they go and help fight him, and no one recognizes this thing. They have no idea where it came from. The only thing they can see, anyways, is that it does have this signia of the Spacewolves on it. And after the whole thing's done, they're like, okay, so who are you? And the only response they get back are snarls and howls as the thing keeps trying to charge him. And so they put it to sleep, and they hibernate it, and then they just kind of release it whenever. It's Logan Grimnar's like ultimate doom. It's like when you roll Snake Eyes, you know? It's like, things aren't going my way. Release the Murder Fang. I mean,
release the Kraken.
Yeah, kind of like that. Well, anyways, Mr. Yuksen, would you like to give us a brief description, anyways, on the Navy before we have to say adieu?
Now, Zeckthar, the Spacewolves maintain one of the largest fleets amongst all the chapters of the Adeptus Astartes. This includes 2 star forts, 8 battle barges, 30 plus strike cruisers, 20 plus Hunter class destroyer squadrons, and 20 plus Gladius and Nova class frigate squadrons. 15 of the largest and most powerful of these vessels are known as the Great Ships, 1 for each great company with 3 in reserve. The fleet includes many different classes and configurations of vessels. 2 of the great ships are massive warships akin to the Imperial Navy capital ships. The Iron Wolf is the ship of Wolf Lord Eagle Ironwolf, who claimed it in combat when his great company's own flagship was badly damaged. It is slightly larger than the Pride Defendress, which is the flagship of the chapter fleet and personal vessel of the Great Wolf Logan Grimnar. One of the reasons for their fleet is so large is, well, they're kind of like privateers.
Huh? You want to run that by me again there, Yuksen?
Yes, well, after all their space encounters, they tend to take the ships that they want to replace with the ones they lost.
So they're really actually pirates.
No, they are privateers.
No, they're pirates.
If they're pirates, they'd also be pillaging, random Imperial ships as well.
Well, okay. So yeah, they don't attack Imperial ships, but they do kind of take everybody's stuff. I mean, you actually just mentioned, anyways. That's why they got into a tussle with the Black Templars, is they were taking orc stuff. They're like, "Ooh, this is mine." They're pirates. Okay, so not only are they Vikings, they're pirates. Interesting.
Well, if you think about it, Vikings, pretty much were pirates and pillagers.
Yeah, it's true. So
they're Vikings.
There you go. Yeah, another reason why they're known as Vikings. What are their tactics like?
Well, generally they focus on close range barrages. So what they'll do is they'll slide up alongside a ship and just basically bombard them with that side's cannons.
The broadsides.
Yeah, broadside.
It's also probably why
and then they'll end up, since in some cases they actually want the ships, they'll board them and then take it over.
So I mean, One of the things that I also find interesting is the way they travel through the warp and how close they actually drop out of the warp to whatever their target is. A lot of people in the Imperium, I believe, used a word for that. It was a nice word. I've heard suicidal, but what's the word that they normally tend to use for that?
Recklessness?
Well, yes, recklessness. Yeah. So they'll literally just like fly in out of the warp and just like drop down right in front of their enemy. That way they can swoop in and use their broadsides. Right?
Yeah, or no doubt in some cases they'll just use basically a battering ram that's built onto the front end of their ship and just ram straight into something.
Yeah, yet again, that word, reckless. I hate to say this, brother, but it is time for us to be done with the Spacewolves.
Indeed, it is a sad day. Why? I could talk about them for another month, but we don't have time. Yet tell me, brother, what are we doing next month?
Why, like I said before, we're going on vacation to Terran 42 to visit our dear friend Sakrona. You know, the guy that asked the question about Bjorn?
Oh yes, how could I forget him? That outlandish vagabond that has the greatest beer as well as great and wonderful stories.
I know, yeah. It'll be good to sit down with him again, discuss some of our favorite games. But that is not all.
Really? What else do you have in store for us?
Oh, another person I would like you to meet. Last time we were on holiday at Terran 42, while Sakrona was showing you his favorite places in, I believe the city he lives in is called Seattle?
Yes, that is where Sakrona resides.
Yes, indeed. Well, I excused myself and traveled the streets and went farther south to a place known as Chacoma. And I met an interesting chap by the name of Dan, and he declared next time we were in town, he'd bring the finest of mead for us to try. He also wishes to meet you.
Me? Well, let me get my finest hat. I didn't know that you would be introducing me to the finest of Terran 42.
Yes, well, he's not the finest of Earth, but he is a friend.
Oh, that's even better. But I must ask though, will he bring some beer?
Unfortunately, no. But he does brew a very fine mead.
Even better. You know me too well, brother. I have always enjoyed mead over the finest of ales. But I must say, that is all the time we have for today. Tune in next time when we take holiday in Terran 42 to the city known as Seattle.
Indeed, Yuksen. And while we won't be answering any questions next month, feel free to subscribe or follow us, however you are listening. Until next time, this is Zeckthar.
And Yuksen, signing off.